Hello, everyone. Welcome and Chodesh Tov. My name is Aryeh Greenberg. I'm JLAC at Brandeis Hillel. And it is a great pleasure for me to introduce Rabbi Yitz Greenberg. Rav Yitz learned in Yeshivat Beit Yosef Novardok from Rabbi and Yavneh, who's Talmud and son-in-law of the altar of Novardok. And anyone who knows the Novardok approach knows how strong they are in pursuing the truth, and their ability to have deep and profound cheshbon nefesh, and their simple but yet strong faith and yirat shamayim. Rav Yitz's other rabbi was his father, Rabbi Chaim, a great Talmid Chacham who learned from Chaim Brisk in Europe. My father, who is Rabbi Chaim's grandson and Rav Yitz's nephew, used to tell us stories about Ahavat Torah, the Ahavat Torah and Ahavat Abriyot of Rabbi Chaim. And as the one who himself learned most of his Torah from his father, I can tell how powerful the Torah becomes for you. Torat Chaim Mamash, when you live with it, when you grow up to it. Rav Yitz also has a direct connection to our corner on earth, being the first full-time director of Brandeis Hillel in the 50s. I think it was your first rabbinical post, if I'm not mistaken. And I can go on and on about his work in the field of Tikkun Olam, promoting dialogue and understanding between Judaism and Christianity, and more, but I'm afraid it will take the whole hour. So, and we gathered here to learn from Rav Yitz. I'm gonna hand it over to Rav Yitz. Without further ado, just we'll have time for question at the end. So please take notes if you want, and we'll have time. So thank you so much, Rabbi Yitz, for joining us. And without further ado, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Nachman. I am speaking to you, and I greet you from Jerusalem, where we are in the process of coming out of a lockdown. This has lasted almost 13 months, but at least for us, but we're on the upswing, hopefully, and I hope America is starting to catch up with the COVID also. I have a special warm feeling for Brandeis and this opportunity, as you just heard, stemming from the fact that Brandeis is a great university with a remarkable Jewish studies tradition. And no less, it was my first job after I was married and as the Hillel director, the first full-time Hillel director at Brandeis. And I have had many positive and wonderful connections to Brandeis over the years, not least to them, your current Hillel director, Seth Winberg, who's a colleague and a friend and someone I admire, and Rabbi Nachman himself. As you heard, full disclosure, he is my grandnephew, and he's quite a remarkable person in his own right. So I welcome this opportunity to talk to you 2 weeks before Passover. I want to reflect with you on the Jewish story, not the story of Jewry or of Jewish history, but the story the Jews have told the world, taught the world, not just told it. In many ways, one could argue that the Jews, at least pound for pound, are the most influential people of all time. In terms of impact on the whole world civilization. And much of that impact comes from the narrative, the story that the Jewish people told the world. Now, when you ask people, what is this story, or what is the great Jewish influence on humanity? The standard answer is God, monotheism. The first people who taught that we have an invisible universal force, presence, God who created and sustains all of existence. Sometimes this is presented as ethical monotheism in the spirit of the prophets, meaning that God who creates and sustains the world also asks humans to do good and to live ethically. And this has had a profound impact on humanity, not only on the 14 million Jews, but it is the core teaching or aspect of Christianity, which reaches 1.9 billion people and got it in many ways from the Jewish tradition. and of Islam, which has profoundly been influenced by Judaism with a number of 1.1 billion, where also God is the central figure. Nevertheless, I want to offer an alternative, if you will, an alternative narrative as to what has been the most influential Jewish story. And that is, of course, not that God is not important, obviously major and central even to this story, but the Torah teaches and Jewish tradition has taught that this universal creator, sustainer, God, also cares, continues in profound connection to existence and to humanity. In fact, God loves and stays close. God loves life, but humanity, the most developed form of life, with particular affection and strength. And therefore, this is the point, God wants the best for his creation, wants humans, the best for humans, and therefore enters into, reaches out to humanity to join in a covenant or partnership, brit in Hebrew, a partnership to repair the world. Modern thinkers call it tikkun olam, but I think the tradition typically speaks of it as Mashiachiyut, as messianism. Nevertheless, in essence, what Judaism's story is, that if humans do their share, if they join with God, there will be a total tikkun, a total repair of the world, the so-called Messianic age, in which we overcome all the enemies of life. And of course, this is a major part of modernity and modern thinking, to overcome poverty and hunger, to overcome oppression and war, oppression meaning all forms of discrimination and war, to overcome sickness, that's part of the Jewish vision. In fact, the ultimate dream is to overcome death itself. As Isaiah says, death will be swallowed up in eternity. In other words, the earth will be turned into a Garden of Eden, and life will flourish. And most important, life within it, especially human life, will be treated with the full dignity it's entitled to on an everyday basis. This story that I've just told not only has shaped 14 million Jews, it has not only shaped the 1.9 billion Christians, and in particular within Islam, the Shiite wing of that religion. It's also in a secular form, the narrative of modernity and of the West, the narrative that 2.3 billion people roughly are currently living, and which is spreading particularly in the East and now in Africa. So you're talking about a story that is shaping and reshaping the bulk of humanity. Now, this part of the narrative that I'm speaking about of Tikkun Olam starts with creation, as the Torah does, as the Jewish tradition does. It doesn't start with the first Jew, it doesn't start with the first Jewish people. It starts with the first moment of existence. And the story of creation basically says that this world is not a product of random forces. It is not the outcome of a blind physical process, although it could be seen and interpreted that way. It is shaped. It is like a work of art, shaped by this universal force, invisible, but universally present. And this creation has been shaped, and if you look carefully and study it, you will see, A, it has rhythms of development built into it. B, you will see that it has goals and outcomes, or at least there are goals and outcomes that were intended by the Creator. If you look at the Torah's account, not so much really an account of literally how the earth developed, but it is a kind of a God's vision of how the world should look. In fact, according to Judaism, will look when we finish improving God's creation. And if you look at the story of creation told in the Torah, you'll see there are three fundamental rhythms built into the tradition, according to the tradition, built into the very element of existence and of life. What are these three rhythms? Well, in the Torah biblical language, the world is moving from chaos to order. in the biblical language, the world starts with tohu vavohu, a kind of void and a total void and a total chaotic situation. And over the course of the 7 days of creation, it moves to order, to Shabbat, which is the seventh day, which is the day of perfect order, of harmony, where all is in proper place, where life is overflowing, where there is no conflict and no disorder, no chaos and no war and no conflict. Of course, if I were talking or making this in the language of our time, in the language of physics, say, we would say it's a world that starts with a big bang, total chaos, so violent that nothing can exist, no matter, no bodies can exist. And then it cycles through extended long periods of radiation era. And then as the radiation subsides, matter coalesces and congeals. And then that matter clusters in what becomes galaxies. And those galaxies develop into stars. And those stars spin off planets and the beginning of life as it is in our planet. So even though most humans think of the world and of the day as moving from order to chaos, that's because of your human limitations and you live inside your own body. If you can see the world from God's perspective, says the Torah, it's a world that's moving from chaos to order, and you are asked to notice this order, I'll come back to it, and join in on the side of order which sustains life. Second, what's the second great rhythm of the creation? The world is moving from non-life to life. Again, if you look at the Torah, day 1, there's no life. Day 2, day 3, there's vegetation, but that's a very limited form of life. Day 4, there's still no life. It's days 5 and 6, the very end of creation, that we get the proliferation of life, the development of fish, and then birds, and then animals, and finally the human being, the kind of the climax of this life evolution and development. So the world we now know, looking in the language of biology, for 13 or 14 billion years of its existence, at least of our planet and our little piece of the galaxy, for 13, 14 billion years, there was no life. And then the one-celled forms of life emerged. And since that time, in the past billion years, there's been an amazing proliferation of life. So here again, you have to overcome the human, self-centered, short-sighted view of existence, which sees us moving from life to death, right? I'm born, I start to die. No, if you look at it from the divine perspective, this is a universe which has actually moved from an extended period of non-life toward a period of greater and greater life. And thirdly, the third rhythm of creation, it's a universe that is moving not just quantitatively toward life, but qualitatively. Life has become, from the very first one cell to now, more and more capable, more and more developed. And of course, the climax of that development, the Homo sapiens, that is to say, in the language of the Bible, the human being who is an image of God. Another way of rephrasing that third rhythm in biblical language would be that life is moving from being less like God to being more and more like God, to the point where the human is so godlike, so amazing, has such capacity as to be compared to God. Now it's a tzelem, it's a shadow, it's an image, it's not the real thing. But it is profoundly godlike in its capacity. And this is the point. These three rhythms, from chaos to order, from non-life to life, and from life to life that is capable of understanding the purpose of existence, understanding the God who is hidden, understanding the development and the direction of the world. And therefore, says the Torah, God reaches out. This is a Jewish story. God reaches out to humans because they have the capacity to understand the pattern and where it should go and where it's meant to go, and to together to repair the world. So humans are asked in behavior, in personal behavior, in societal policy, and in every aspect of their work, very simply, to live on the side of the constructive life-giving rhythms, on the side of order that sustains life as against chaos that disrupts it, on the side of quantity of life, increasing life, versus non-life and versus death, which is ever present and must be struggled with and reversed. And of course, for quality of life, for upgrading the quality of life, rather than degrading or reducing or diminishing the quality of life. So I'll leave this section by saying, all commandments, all instructions of Jewish religion, in my judgment, are intended to guide humans to act on the side of order for life, on the side of life as against death, and for quality of life. And I'll come back to that in a few moments. This is the narrative the Jewish people taught the world, but the narrative has another very important dimension, and that is about life itself being central and the most significant aspect of creation, and that which we are supposed to treasure, support, and increase. I start with the fact that the Jewish tradition teaches that God is Elohim Chayim, a living God, who loves life. In fact, loves all of creation. Tov Hashem Lakol, says the Psalms, Ashrei, which is said actually 3 times a day by traditional Jews. God is good to all because Rachamav, God's compassion, mercy, love, is on all God's creatures. So this importance of life, this love of life, is to be expressed in our behaviors, in our battles, in our values, and in the way we treat everything around us. Now, again, it's not that that which is non-life is of no value. There is a fundamental law in Jewish tradition about inorganic, just plain matter. Because it's created, it should be treated as something of value. Don't waste it, Bal Tashrit, don't waste it. Because to waste it is to say it has no value, no meaning. It has no weight. The answer is it should be taken seriously. It's remarkable in its own qualities. But then, as life develops, the responsibility and the recognition of the uniqueness and power of life has to guide our behavior. Thus, for example, living things, there's a much higher level of responsibility. There is the law of Tsar Balchaim. You're not allowed to cause needless suffering to animals of any sort. It's, of course, the logic of vegetarianism, which I'll come back to very shortly. But the Garden of Eden is a vegetarian society, according to the first chapter of the Bible. And according to the prophets in Messianic days, we'll return to vegetarianism because the ideal of the world is to be for life and not for humans to live and continue to live by killing or by using the life of other creatures. Now, of course, that's a nice ideal statement, but in the present real world, it's impossible. First of all, humans need the protein. And secondly, they have lived by and developed and evolved thanks to their hunting skills. So the Torah comes back and says, well, the ideal is vegetarian, but God permits meat at this moment. Now I say the ideal is vegetarian. Even with the laws of kosher, all vegetables, all minerals are kosher. They can be eaten and they can be prepared and they're totally available. Restrictions on eating kick in only if you want to eat living things and kill organisms. So how do we express that? With restrictions. This is something so precious that if you do use it, you have to accept restrictions that remind you and that goad you to going toward that ideal where you'll stop this process. So for example, the first restriction, the first kosher law, you might say, applies to all humanity according to the Torah, not just to Jewish people. If you kill an animal for its meat, you cannot eat the blood. And this is an obligation and restriction on all human beings. Why? Because blood carrier of life, and therefore at the least acknowledge that you don't own this life, that by right humans shouldn't be taking this life. And you acknowledge that by saying, okay, I need the meat, I eat it, but I will put aside the blood as something to exemplify that the life of the animal is beyond my control, beyond my ownership. Now, kosher or kashrut says that the Jewish people is prepared to live by a higher standard right now. We're all on the road to the ultimate standard where there will be no killing of animals. But how do we get there? The Jewish tradition says in this covenant, one step at a time, and the Jewish people agrees to live at a higher state of restriction until we get there. What's the highest state of restriction? Again, it's a question of showing reverence for life, even as you take it. So the higher the life in kosher, the more restrictions there are. This seems to be a ritual, but it's really a statement about life and life's value. For example, the lowest form of life that you're allowed to eat in Jewish tradition is fish. So immediately we have a restriction. It's one restriction, it's species. Only a very limited, and it is a very limited number of species that have fins and scales can be eaten. And if you intend to move up the scale of life and eat higher forms of life, there are more restrictions. So for example, the next level up is birds. And birds, well, birds are a higher form, so you have more restrictions. Now, again, what are the kosher birds? Well, unlike fish, we don't have a specific set of signs, although we do have one general observation, and you will be struck by that. Predatory birds. If you have a bird with a striking talon, it's a sign that lives by predation. It's not kosher. The birds that we do eat. However, in addition to species restrictions, there is slaughter, shechita, killing restrictions. Shechita is designed to kill the bird with one stroke, swift stroke that cuts off the blood supply to the brain, so it dies a swift and painless death. And if you would want to push your eating to a higher level of life, namely animals, there's a third restriction. First of all, there are species again. You can't eat a very limited number of species. And incidentally, the species that are allowed to be eaten are herbivore. They're vegetarians themselves. I guess the Torah is saying you are what you eat. You shouldn't be eating predatory animals because you shouldn't be a predator. But be that as it may, you can eat only a very limited number of species. And furthermore, you can restrict it as to how you kill them. Again, must be shechita, which is a swift and painless death. And last but not least, there's a third restriction, because it's a higher form. The third restriction is, how do you prepare the food? And the answer is, milk and meat cannot be cooked together, cannot be mixed together. Sorry about that McDonald's cheeseburger. Now, why is that so? Again, it's very obvious, because meat is a sign of a dead, killed animal. Milk, mother's milk, which is what the Torah uses in referring to this law, is a sign of nurturing life. Nurturing life and killing life are in contradiction, and you should acknowledge that even as you compromise and eat meat. Now, the higher form of life of all is, of course, the human who is so developed that according to the Torah, humans are called the image of God, Tselem Elokim. And here the Talmud rabbis conclude, their form of dignity is so high that they are born with three intrinsic dignities. Those three intrinsic dignities are infinite value. The image of God is to be seen as of infinite value, meaning it's worth more than any amount of money you can imagine. I tell people, you may think this is an exaggeration, but if you stop for a moment, there are images of man that sell for hundreds of millions of dollars. The highest priced piece of art published or printed, sold, and whose value was printed in public is, of course, Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci, which was sold for $450 million. Well, if a Da Vinci is worth $450 million, and if you've seen a Picasso sold for $150 million, if a Picasso is worth $150 million, and keep in mind that he can't even paint straight and both eyes are on one side of the face, be that as it may, what's an image painted by God worth, created by God worth? And the Jewish answer is infinitely more. Now, this is not just a cute comment and even an ideal statement. What happens with the Da Vinci after they buy it for $450 million? The answer is they build a gallery with a special room for it that's going on right now in Dubai. And in that room, it must be perfectly air controlled, not too hot, that could affect the colors, not too cold, that could crack the canvas or hurt, damage the frame. Not too wet, because that erodes the painting itself. Not too dry, because that can flake. In short, perfect shelter for something precious. Now, if you compare that on the next winter night, go downtown Boston or any major city in the world and see in the snow and sleet a homeless man lying on the street, and the cars drive by and they splash slush on them. What do we see? What we see is very obvious. We live in a world where human beings are not treated like the image of God and of infinite value. And that is the measure of the tikkun, of the world correction that Judaism says humanity is called to correct. And one can put this across the board in terms of what's the value of life. How about medical insurance? If people don't have it, they postpone the going to the doctor, they get sicker and they die. So there should never be a person who doesn't have medical insurance or who doesn't have food because of lack of money, or doesn't have education, as we have much of the third world where children go to work and can't, because a human life should be treated as infinitely valuable. That's the major tikkun that's needed right now, and that we are called to do as human beings. And the second value of every human life in the image of God is that it's equal. There is no preferred image of God. God is not white, nor is God black or yellow in color of skin. God is neither male nor female, although that will come as a shock to a lot of religions, which, including our own, which has used male language about God. In short, the claim that a particular person is distinctly superior, a superior image of God, is another way of idolatry, of claiming that some human forged picture, statue, law, practice values one life more than the other. In fact, it's equal, and that's what it means to be an image of God. And the Torah tells us Adam and Eve, the ancestors of all humanity, no matter life, color, religion, race, sexual orientation, human status, none of these takes away or modifies the fundamental truth of being in the image of God. The last dignity of every human being in the image of God is uniqueness. Images of man can be duplicated. You can duplicate a dollar bill, you can duplicate an airplane stamp. If, by the way, by accident, the airplane is flying upside down, that is known in philately as the Flying Jenny. There was a group of airmail stamps in the 1920s that were printed upside down. So each stamp was worth several $1 million. But that's because of the fluke. But in truth, human creations can be duplicated exactly. Human beings cannot be. The image of God, each one is unique, even though they come from one original mold and source. So the point is to create a world in which this is not just a theory, but an actual practice. How do you create a world which listens to the uniqueness of each person, which treasures the diversity, because this one is colored and this one is not, because this one is gender of this gender and this of a different gender and of a transgender? It doesn't matter. How do you get a world that tunes into the uniqueness of each individual, that rejects stereotypes because they lump a whole people together instead of dealing? That is the challenge of Tikkun Olam. That's the work of Tikkun Olam. And Judaism teaches, therefore, that the work of overcoming poverty, yes, business, transportation, communication, this is part of Tikkun Olam done properly. It has to be done on the side of life and toward equality and dignity of people. The work of overcoming war, which wipes out unique, equal, infinitely precious people. That is, again, these are the challenges of Tikkun Olam. The prophets predict they will beat their swords into plowshares, and someday they will not learn war anymore. That's the task and the calling of humanity, to overcome sickness. Again, that's part of the prophetic vision of Messianic life. So that's our second story, that the human beings have to come together, and it's a covenantal approach, meaning you start in the real world. You even make compromises with the real world, because covenant says you can't coerce, You can't go to violence and force your way. Even your opponents, those who are not for equality, those who are not for human dignity, should be treated with dignity, and they cannot be coerced. You'll persuade them, you'll negotiate with them. And that's why this way typically does involve compromises and one step at a time. But if you do one step at a time, generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium, that's the Jewish commitment and teaching to the world, then eventually the world someday will be repaired and we will live in a messianic time. Now I finish with one more dimension. What do you do in the meantime other than working as a collective to overcome poverty or overcome war or overcome sickness? The answer is, in your own individual life, this is the other claim of Jewish tradition, and this is what is encapsulated in halakha, so-called in the Jewish tradition. Every moment of your life, you have to make decisions and behaviors. What it claims is, again, each moment of your life should reflect these fundamental values, that the person you're dealing with is an image of God, is your equal, is a value, is unique, and should be spoken to, should be treated that way. Each moment of your life, you should look at yourself as well in the same spirit and say, the next act I do should be in accord with the rhythms of creation that will bring the final repair. In other words, on the side of order, on the side of quality and quantity of life. So the next moment, eating, I've given you the example already. The next moment I eat. If I don't eat, I will die. So to eat is a choice of life. But when I choose eating, do I choose to maximize life and minimize death? Well, I mentioned before, that's vegetarianism or veganism. But if I don't, if I choose meat, how can I maximize life and minimize death? So again, I gave you the examples of kashrut, but it doesn't stop with that. How about if this is an overfished species, you don't eat? How about if the laborers and the workers in the field are not protected, if they are harmed by the various sprays that are used, then that makes the food treif, that makes the food the subject of death. So you're not showing maximum reverence for life. How about local, so you don't have to fly it in from around the world, causing carbon footprint and pollution of the earth? In short, the next act of eating, well chosen. Is it healthy food or is it saturated with sugar and salt and fat? As I tell people, is your next bite a piece of celery that's so healthy, or is some Haagen-Dazs or Ben & Jerry ice cream, which will shoot your veins full of cholesterol and fat and sugar? You have to think twice, otherwise you're choosing death. Well, although let me confess, I have chosen death more than once, but you get the main thrust. The next moment of eating is not just moment of eating. How about the next moment of speaking? Will the next word I say be a word of possibility, of encouragement, of respect for the other person? Or will it be a word that degrades them? And this is an extremely important, because the words, the relationships that we make are fundamental statements of how we behave, whether the other person image of God or not. Will the next word I say to them be a word of stereotype and degradation, or of discrimination, hostility, hatred? Or will the next word be a word of respect, encouragement? Will be a chance that they can do, encouraging and helping them to reach a higher level of self-development and self-fulfillment. I'll give you the classic example here, the so-called Lashon Hara. Even telling the truth about somebody, and telling the truth is one of the ways you show respect for the dignity and equality of your other. But if you tell a negative truth, a bad piece of information about somebody, to somebody else who has no need to know. If I know this person is a swindler and he's about to enter a business deal, it's a mitzvah to tell the future partner, look out, this person has been a swindler, you want to protect yourself. That's the mitzvah. But if I tell it to a third party who has no need to know, has no connection to this person, this truth, he is a swindler, becomes a lie. It's a denial and degrading of this person's image of God. I'm telling you, you think he's a good person, he's not. So this commandment to speak and respect life can turn a truth into a lie and a sin. And of course, Therefore, every word should be chosen accordingly. And I could go through every aspect of life, the work you do. Will it repair the universe? Or will it be a piece of schlock that will be thrown away and just pollute? Will the production process itself cause global warming? Or will it upgrade and be filtered and controlled and respected so at the same time that it creates better quality of life for people, it does not disrupt the environment? These are the tests of every moment. I close with a quote from the Torah as understood by Maimonides. So the Jewish narrative has tried to get us to think of the future process whereby the world can be repaired and turned to Garden of Eden, and to think of the present moment as the moment where we can choose life, and by choosing life, maximize life and the dignity of life on this planet right now. Moses, at the end of the Torah in Deuteronomy, summarizes what has he been teaching through all these laws and all these stories and all these traditions. And he says in Deuteronomy chapter 29, behold, I place before you today et hachayim v'et hatov, life and good, et hamovet v'et hara, death and evil. And 2 verses later, he adds, I put before you the blessing and the curse. In effect, says Maimonides, notice how Moses twins them. Life and good are twinned, death and evil are twinned. The Torah says, choose life. Says Maimonides, in every act of mitzvah or goodness is in some way a choice of life. Every act of evil, sin, hurt, harm is in some way a choice of death or quality of death for somebody else. And therefore, the commandment is to choose life. Now we're living in a century, in a millennium, where there have been major breakthroughs toward trying to say infinite value of every human being, no matter the color, for infinite equality of all human beings, no matter the race or the gender, in a period where the uniqueness of humans has been pushed for. We also have lived in a period of great catastrophic revenge and destruction in the name of revolution. So the unfinished task of humanity, says the Torah, says the Jewish tradition, is to rally the forces of life and to work on their side, is to understand that perfecting the world one step at a time avoids the excesses of coercion and total control that have marred revolutionary movements and turned them into Stalinism or Maoism or Khmer Rouge. That's the unfinished task, and I would say the unfinished task of the Jewish people, which is to continue, to model and to try to exemplify as a community such behavior, and to continue to teach the world this is where it has to go. Of course, I don't mean to sound like it's just us, but I mean to say that we, among others, can be teachers and role models, and not least co-workers in this process of Tikkun Olam. That's the unfinished agenda of the Jewish religion. Thank you. That's my pitch, and I'll be welcome your responses and comments and demurrals, however they may be.
Thank you so much. I think there are a couple of questions in the chat.
Please. So please read them. I'm technologically disabled. So I'll be happy to get read the questions.
Yeah, so Steve is asking, can you elaborate or reconcile how the Torah, which is Earth-based, with the potential of life on other planets in the galaxy that will have their own history in biology? Everything that happened in the Torah happened on Earth, especially in light of Perseverance, which is looking for life on Mars for the next few years. So if life or evidence of life was found on Mars or in a galaxy far, far away, how would the Torah apply to those civilizations, which might be older than ours?
I love the question. You got the point. And the truth is that we should expect life. I mean, given the infinity of stars and of planets, and given this remarkable gift of life and love of life, which God has shown, one should assume, as I do, that it's not just on Earth. They will find other planets and other opportunities throughout the galaxy. Yes, and in the far, far galaxies too. In fact, I once speculated, so the answer is, now, I'm not saying it may be the same Torah. It may well be a Torah that reflects After all, our Torah tells the story of Jewish people and of other people on this planet and their actual history. That's part of the uniqueness. So it could well be the same general truth about life and about God will be true, but there may be very different characters and very different behavior patterns. So it reminds me, I once sort of speculated, this was the early days of Star Wars, but yeah, by the logic of what I just said and what your question, there should be Jews in every far galaxy, or the equivalent of Jews. What the Jews are, they're if we're all partners, what Jews are lead partners or active partners or managing partners, teachers. So there should be in every galaxy such people. So I was speculating, well, who were the Jews, or who is the Jew in Star Wars? And of course, I thought about it for quite a while, then I realized I could figure it out. The answer is, you have to compare Jewish heroes with Christian heroes. If you look at the history, again, Judaism stresses Christianity very much the same message, except that Christianity, out of conviction that such a hard job to repair the world, that the lead character, the lead hero, has to be perfect. In fact, has to be God himself in order to get this job done. So the Christian heroes are generally perfect and and spotless. And if you look at the King Arthur stories, Lancelot, who's the greatest warrior of his time, can't find the Holy Grail because he has not only killed people, he's had an affair with the queen, and which disqualifies him. So only Galahad, the pure son, can be the one who finds the Holy Grail. But the Jewish tradition says, no, the reality is we're only human. We're not saying the Jews are perfect either. They're a role model, but a role model of human beings with flaws. I mean, the greatest Jews, King David committed adultery. The greatest of our mothers, Sarah, she loved Abraham and she loved life so much, she told him to take Hagar as a second wife because she couldn't give birth. But after he took her and she became pregnant, Sarah became understandably jealous, angry, and she abused him. So we're human. That's the Torah's answer. In fact, that's the point. If we can become builders of a better world, anybody can. So my answer, looking around, I said, well, who's the hero? Not Luke Skywalker. He's perfect. So he's not the Jewish hero. Then, of course, I realized immediately, it's Han Solo. Han Solo, he's a flawed hero, and he's clearly Jewish. And once I realized that was the key, I did research him. I discovered he was Jewish. His name was Hananya Soloveitchik. He was just trying to pass in this culture, as many Jews sometimes try to pass. So my answer is, in general, I'm not sure who the current Jew in Star Wars is, but whatever galaxy they will be, there hopefully will be. It's part of the pluralism and uniqueness of humanity. There'll be a group or groups that manage, that teach, that pioneer, that push a little harder for these goals and for communicating the connection between God and humanity.
Diane asking, your narrative seems to disagree with the Orthodox view of women not being counted or treated equally. Can you explain?
Yeah, well, of course, that's a fair question, and it's a real challenge to Orthodox Jews. I am one myself. So I'll put it this way. I've tried to hint it all along in terms of the issue involved. Judaism intends to reach the Messianic age in which all human beings are in the image of God, meaning infinitely valuable, equal, and unique. And make it very clear, the Torah says so unequivocally. It says, God created the human being in God's image. In the image of God, God created him. Zachar u'nekeva Abraham. Man and woman, God created them. So there's no question that in principle, in the Garden of Eden, men and women are fully equal. But the Torah was given in the real world, like it ended up permitting meat because of the realities. The truth is, where the Torah was given in the 12th century, or whatever century that particular was, women were bought and sold. So the Torah does not overnight make them equal. What it does is start a process of redemption and perfection. Again, it's almost awkward to say it, but it's right there in the Torah, in the Exodus chapter 21, right after the 10 Commandments and the Sinai revelation. The Torah says, up to now, doesn't say that what about this first sentence. Up to now, women were bought and sold commercially. From now on, you can't do that. Only a father can sell his daughter. So that's the end of commercial trafficking in women. Father can sell his daughter, well, only to somebody who will marry her. And if he does not marry her, she goes free. And finally, when he does marry her, he must treat her like an equal free woman, that is to say, like a free woman, not someone that he bought. Now, again, it's far from equal image of God, but it's the first step. And I believe that the first step is followed by the second step until the day will come when they will be equal. And what's my proof text? Hosea, the prophet Hosea, when he is addressed and when he tells the story that God will take his people and renew the covenant with them, renew the brit of the Torah with them in a redeemed world. And of course, the Jews again are the first example of what the whole world will be like, just as Passover we're about to celebrate. This is the first example of slaves being taken to freedom. But the big teaching of the Torah is that every human being will be taken from slavery to freedom. So Hosea says when that final renewal of the brit will take place, on that day, the woman will say, Tikri li ishi v'lo bali. The woman will speak to her husband. The Jewish people will speak to God as the symbol of the wife speaking to the husband and say, you are my man, not my Baal, not my husband, meaning my owner. So the prophet understands that the day will come when women will be fully equal to men. It's not real at that time. I happen to think we're living in a very remarkable time because there's been major progress toward bringing women into full equality, full dignity. And again, I have to credit the liberal denomination started it. But even in Orthodoxy, for the first time in its history, we have women rabbis, we have women scholars, we have women leadership. And I believe that this is an important step toward the messianic realization of full equality, of full dignity. Now, again, there are Orthodox people say, no, nothing can change. The Orthodox establishment has said that the women rabbis are not valid. But my answer is, I think that they're mistaken. And the Orthodoxy represents not that there is no change, as I've described all along. The covenant, it goes through history, it changes, and it develops, and in part, in times of the culture around it. None of us saw the full potential of women in terms of learning until this century. And Rabbi Salvator, interesting, the first Orthodox rabbi to teach women Talmud in America, he has an essay where he says point blank, women are existentially equal. They are images of God. They can be leaders and carry the flag for God like men. Now, he didn't come to grips with, he left that for me and you, to come to grips with the fact that doesn't that imply, therefore, that women should become rabbis or should become counted in a minyan or should become, and I think it's coming. It's not there now, but there have been significant steps. I would say more, but you really should invite my wife to speak to the group. She had been a pioneer in Orthodox feminism, and I think she has really made remarkable steps and remarkable compromise, which reminds me of a joke I'll allow myself to tell. In 1982, there was an issue on rabbinate in the magazine, then the leading magazine, Judaism. And she was invited to write an article, and she wrote, can Orthodox women be rabbis? She did an analysis of Rabbanut. And if you look at the analysis, she said, there's no intrinsic halachic obstacle. Anything a rabbi can do, a woman can do. Rabbis also happen to read the Torah or lead a service, and right now women aren't allowed to do that. So she said, but that's a social obstacle. And of course, in time, there are women, tefillah, where women do these roles and so on. She said, but if you ask me in principle, is there an obstacle? The answer is no. She writes this article, and she lets me read it first before she published it. And I love the article. And the last paragraph is really exciting. She says, since I'm convinced there's no obstacle in principle, I believe that in my lifetime, we will have women rabbis, which frankly in 1982 sounded really off the wall. And I get to this last paragraph, I'm so excited. Her study is upstairs. I go running up the stairs. I run into her room and I hug her and I say, my God, this is an amazing article. I love it. And do you realize what you have just predicted? She says, what? She said, well, you said Orthodox women rabbis in my lifetime. We're going to live forever. Of course, I was totally wrong. I'm not going to live forever, but yes, there are women rabbis in my lifetime. Now, again, a long way to go. I don't want to sound complacent, and there's still a lot of resistance, but I believe it will come. Take some more questions.
Thank you. Renana asked, how do you reconcile the punishment in the Torah for breaking Shabbos with Jewish respect for life? And I want to add into that question, what about the three Yihareg ve'al yavo? It seems that some things are greater than life.
Well, these are two very different questions. So again, the answer is, I believe, again, the covenant operates in the context of the culture around it. In the culture around Judaism in the 12th century or in the 10th century, there's a lot of death penalties, and the Torah builds off that to improve the treatment, to restrict death penalty. There's still a lot of death penalties, including in the violation of Shabbat. However, if you look at Rabbinic tradition, the next major development within Jewish tradition, the Rabbinic tradition basically came to the same conclusion I did, that the covenantal way of improving step by step should be applied to death penalty, because in the long run, if you put people to death officially, but there is not just I'm not talking murder, I'm talking about the legal authorities. Maybe the person deserved it, but by putting to death, you're weakening the respect, the awe, the reverence that all life should get, even the murderer. And so the rabbis made death penalty so difficult to reach that the famous Talmudic passage that they ended up, and eventually all death penalties had to go to the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court had to approve. The Talmud said, if once in 7 years, and another rabbi says, no, once in 70 years, someone actually was condemned to death and executed, this became known as the Bloody Sanhedrin. So the rabbis de facto, in a sense, said that in the early stages, maybe death penalty did achieve the goal, which is to show awe and respect for life. If you killed life, if you wasted life, if you did things that are totally break the system, you're subject to death penalty. But by the rabbinic time already, we felt we could communicate the respect for life more by not putting people to death. Now that brings me to the second question. So how come there are 3 commandments that you're supposed to die rather than give in on? But if you look at those 3 commandments, first of all, I remind you, 610 of the 613 are overridden because of respect for life. And Maimonides, he said, anybody who hesitates to do all the work on Shabbat, all the work necessary to help a sick person, not just someone who's definitely in danger, even if there's a possibility of danger, if you don't do that freely, quickly, and immediately, he denounces them as false believers, apikursim. He denounces them as people who turn the Torah's laws into laws of hatred and vengeance for life, when it's meant to be wars to live by, to respect life. Now, why the 3 exceptions? Very clear, it seems to me. The first exception is murder. You can't murder somebody else. Murder, I'm talking about not self-defense, murder, in order to protect your life. Because why? Because if you give your martyrdom, if you allow yourself to be martyred rather than kill an innocent person, one person dies. Just as if you kill that innocent person to save your life, one person dies. But the difference is, had you killed, that person's death would have weakened respect for life. People would say, to save your own skin, you're willing to kill an innocent person. By martyring yourself, you're upholding the value of life, because people say, that's it. Life is so valuable that you make the ultimate sacrifice to uphold it. The second such commandment, of course, is idolatry. And here I feel very strongly about it. My whole thesis is really built on this, because the rabbis felt, what's idolatry? It's something human manufactured, not just an idol. How about Nazism? How about Stalinism, where you take a human philosophy and you make it absolute, and on that basis you condemn and put to death, or you keep alive? In short, you take something human and absolutize it, that's idolatry, it becomes a source of death. It's no accident that totalitarian movements, like the Nazis, ended up trying to wipe out the Jewish people, create a whole kingdom of death in the death camps. It's no accident that Maoism killed 30, 40 million peasants in the name of making equality and human dignity possible. So rabbis felt you have to martyr yourself to fight and not accept idolatry, because if idolatry wins, all of life will be cheapened and wiped out. The third example, of course, is sexual violation, Gilui Arayot. So again, I wouldn't say this for all, but let me take the easy example of incest or of rape or child pedophile abuse. It's like murder, the rabbis felt. It's kind of a murder of the soul. And therefore, again, it's worth dying to prevent this cheapening of life. So again, it seems to me the three exceptions only prove my principle, that the highest value in Judaism is to increase reverence, respect, and love, and treatment, proper treatment of life.
Thank you. Rafi Rubinstein mentioned your dialogue with the Dalai Lama in context of Tikkun Olam, and he's wondering if you have had continued dialogue with the Dalai Lama regarding how they can continue working toward gaining their homeland while still working to repair the world.
The dialogue of the Dalai Lama, yes, Father, it was a very important and moving experience for us. And the truth, I have to admit, I had known little or nothing. I had some knowledge of Buddhism. I had little or no knowledge of Tibetan Buddhism before we came there. You know, the old joke, which I have done ever since I've done a kind of a reprise of, the famous joke is, what's the nearest living religion to Judaism? And the answer is Chabad. Well, it's a joke, of course, but in the same way, I used to tell people, now that I've been in Tibet, I take it back. The nearest living religion to Orthodox Judaism is Tibetan Buddhism. Why do I say that? In Tibetan Buddhism, we discovered the monks who were the leaded, they studied classic texts. It's really rabbinic texts. I mean, they don't call it rabbinic, it's their text. And they study in a Beit Midrash, and they study it by arguing with each other and trying to disprove the other side. And they write commentaries on the text and super commentaries and super commentaries. It's very much like a yeshiva tradition. So that was an important experience to learn. More important, we identified with their suffering and their struggle, because I really felt it's like Herzl 100 years ago when he started, the great power was against him, to try to convince the powers of the world to stand up for the Tibetans. And I'm quite heartbroken, I have to say, because in fact, the world has not upheld the Tibetans. It has basically given into Chinese might, into Chinese money and economic power, as it's now doing with the Uyghurs, which is also a Muslim group that the Chinese are horrifyingly persecuting, cultural genocide, maybe actual genocide. So the answer is, we did stay in touch. In fact, we did our best, we thought, to strengthen them. The big question that the Dalai Lama had, that he asked us to come and visit with him, was, the Jewish people managed to survive 2,000 years of exile and powerlessness. And that's what happened to him. He was forced to flee Tibet, and he saw that he's not going to get back in his lifetime. How do you survive for those 2,000 years? So we tried all kinds of explanations based on Jewish experience. My wife, who I think made the best presentation, at least the most useful, said it was the family and home. They have almost nothing in the family and home. And so it was a very eye-opener to him. Of course, family, the Dalai Lama himself was raised, taken away from his family at the age of 5 and raised in a monastery without parents. So they never occurred to them that family could be a major source of religious strength and cultural strength. They were so inspired by this that actually they said the Dalai Lama was going to come and visit us in America, and we'll have a Shabbos with him so he can sort of learn what Shabbos is and bring it to his people. Actually, it turned out at the last minute he couldn't come. He sent Robert Thurman, who was his American representative, the father of Uma Thurman, but he took notes on Shabbat. Again, I don't know how far they got with it, but that was one example. We tried to teach them about day schools and about intensive camping. And in fact, they sent a group of educators, and we brought them, my wife brought them to a series of camps around America so they could learn how to use camps. So we have kept a limited dialogue and try to be helpful to them. But again, I have to admit, for the most part, it's a failure in that the political powers and the powers that be have given in to Chinese abuse because of the Chinese power. And so it's something I feel it's a great regret every day. I sort of feel it's like Zionism in the early days had to fight indifference and failure to come through. Somehow they managed, and I pray every day that they will hang in there, but it's a tough situation.
Thank you. I think we have time for to take one more question if anybody wants. Otherwise, okay. Well,
Thank you.
Let me make one comment about the Uyghurs too, because again, the Jewish people, there's an international movement trying to help them. There are Muslims in the Xinjiang province in China, and they are being culturally uprooted and genocide. They have 1 million of them in detention camps. And Jews around the world have taken the lead, and for the right reason. They say, we were slaves, and we will never forget what it was like to be in Egypt. And this is what the Torah, that's what Passover coming up is about. So I'd like to say, call your attention. There are ways in which you can lend your voice to help the Uyghurs, and this would be a very important enrichment of your Passover celebration. So I'll leave it at that, and I wish you all happy and kosher and constructive Passover.